slide or two. We're going to start out the item number 1. Those are the things we hope to accomplish today. We're going to regroup. It's been a little over a month since we met. We need to talk about what our schedule will be going forward. We want to check in on the WEFTEC conference and hear from the core team on progress that they're making. And of course, we always want to give you an opportunity to participate, provide feedback and suggestions. So at the close of the meeting, we'll revisit this idea of our schedules. How frequently do we think we want to meet going forward? So if you want to advance to the next slide, I'll set us up for the WEFTEC conference review.
I'm sorry, coming up, sorry.
That's okay. So this is our structure to remind everybody that we've got multiple teams working on the WISE initiatives, and we are the people team. So we had 2 teams before, workforce and organizational culture, and those have been combined into the people team. We still have a CIP team, team assets, team energy, and team analytics, and of course, team change. We put a lot of weight on the team change folks to help us be able to be successful in changing. And so with that, I think we can advance to that. Well, actually, before we do that, does anybody have anything they'd like to, that's missing in the agenda that we had laid out? Maybe you can go back one slide, Jello, if that's easy to do. Is there something you were expecting or hoping to see on this agenda that you're not seeing? Because maybe we can still accommodate that. Feel free to unmute or throw it in the chat. Otherwise, I think we'll advance to slide 4 and we'll hear about the WEFTEC conference. Thanks.
Yes, so I'm just going to quickly review. I think most of you should have seen this particular slide before about the workshop that we held in Chicago. It was lower attendance than in a normal year when WEFTEC would have been higher attendance, but we were pleased that there were 10 new utilities there. They were positive. In fact, everybody there was engaged, very engaged and positive about the experience that they had in the workshop. I'm going to just briefly point out that Fadon and Barry Leiner gave an introduction. Mark and welcomed folks. Mark Poling described the work of the steering committee, and there was a steering committee meeting that was held at the close of the meeting. So we're making definite progress there on the strategic plan and other issues. We wound up having Dan Ott gave the presentation on business process modeling and improvement at Kansas City and overall, and Duncan McCura facilitated the feedback discussion. It went very well. We had heavy use of Mentimeter during the session. You'll see a few slides later on some of that. Kevin Johnson from Stantec, who was basically the lead for the technology research project under the Water Research Foundation. Cello is a co-principal investigator for that project. Kevin reviewed the Intelligent Water Systems Maturity Assessment that has been developed that, in fact, Cello, I would say, because he's modest, of course, but he did most of the work on that. And that was new information, and that was well received. And then Mike Sweeney facilitated the feedback and discussion and a review process of that. And then for this group, I would say a big important part of the workshop was organizational culture and maturity assessment. Lisa, Alice, and and Kesra. Where's Kesra? Oh, there she is. Gave a recorded video, which was excellently done and well received by everyone. And there was a lot of participation and engagement afterwards and in follow-up of that. We'll see a little bit of, a few slides um, related to that, especially Alice is going to be going over the future, the current work plan that we have a little shortly here. And then we had change management. Ramona Harry did a great job and going through where we are, where we're headed on that. We had some very good engaged feedback, and then Cello wouldn't say this, but he gave, a superb kind of next steps in the long-term plan, the long-term vision. People responded well to that, and I think it sets the stage for our path forward. And I'd say that this the presentation, Cello, I know that you provided the videos for this team, but the presentation, it's a long presentation, 150 plus slides, but basically, if he hasn't already, he'd provide the slide deck for you all to see. So next slide, please. Just a few slides that are relevant to this group. I think it was important. We asked in the course of the workshop, what are the key business goals that utilities have that are to be achieved? And you can see the listing of what came out on top. These were all important, but improving performance and regulatory compliance, reducing cost, reducing risks to staff and equipment, and safety came out on top. There were others, but these were the leading goals that utilities had that are kind of their business drivers for the work that they're doing. Next slide, please. And for those issues that played an important part in your previous change management efforts, we wanted to, and you can see here that these are relevant to the workforce and organizational culture team. These are the issues that played an important part in what they have done previously in change management. And you know that nothing scored a 5 and nothing scored a 1, but lack of sponsorship at the executive level and resistance on a management level were less of an issue, but they were still an issue, as you can see. And resistance at the staff level, or another way to interpret this is resistance and maybe lack of engagement, was really up there. It's often as a key issue. A collaboration between business units. Communication was lack of effective communication, and skills in doing change management were the leading key issues. Next slide. And after this slide, we can stop and get any feedback or questions. But this was a pretty cool Mentimeter slide where, from an overall WISE standpoint, providing comments based on what people heard at the all-day workshop. And aside from not having enough coffee in the room, all of these are actually quite important, but nothing like this out there in the marketplace for the water sector. So it's worth joining and contributing. And we are expecting some new members to join as a result of going to the workshop. And the second to the last one in that column, enjoyed and acquired new understanding in people, process, and technology. That in the next column, great tools for the toolkit provided. Each will require practice to get better at using them, but the foundation is there. People appreciated the methodology and the construct of it, and there was a lot more substance to it out there. It was good to know that there are other people in utilities to discuss these issues, and they appreciated the client-based, the utility-based, and peer-driven approach that we had. They enjoyed the conversation, and it's much needed. So hundreds of agencies aren't reinventing the wheel or failing to do so on their own. That this was an important priority. So with that, maybe we'll just take Lisa. Maybe you can facilitate us through this. If people don't have comments, that's fine, but maybe we take a pause at this stage.
I'm in trouble getting my camera. There we go. Yeah, there's some good comments here. I think be curious to see what people were. Well, number one, were people surprised? If you go back one slide, I think that strikes me as an interesting slide with the indicate the issues there. Anybody surprised by that and have some thoughts that or insights that they might want to share with the group? Looks like Alice has got her hand up. You want to go ahead?
Well, actually, I didn't so much have any thoughts or insights. This doesn't surprise me. I think that's, I'd like to see maybe what issues were lower and didn't make it to the slide, or was these the only ones you looked at? But really, my original question, why I put my hand up, was I'm wondering if there was anything that anybody at the workshop said that surprised you, or that you thought maybe you wanted to sort of tweak the direction we're headed a little bit, that they sort of gave you an idea that you hadn't thought of before.
Well, you know, Cello or others, you know, could, and Mark was there, you could chime in. I don't know that there were huge surprises. This group has been engaged all along and has probably encountered every potential surprise, but I was a little, I don't know, surprised, but I was very encouraged that even the people that were there that were focused on technology were saying that their challenges were people oriented. They wanted to like listen to the workforce and organizational culture and change management portions, that was important to them. But I was I don't know that I was surprised, but people were embracing really every aspect that we covered from a methodology standpoint. I think that they appreciated that it's a work in progress, and they were, it opened their eyes a little bit in terms of just how much was there. So already, even though it's a journey and we're making progress. Mark, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was surprised, but the utility partners, when they spoke, that was certainly the most powerful part of our presentations, because it's from practitioners. So we really, really appreciated those that did either the recording or those who were able to be there in person. So that, but it isn't surprising, unfortunately, but I just wanted to make sure we had that comment out there.
Yeah, Mark. So there were comments, Mark, that it was nice to hear from the utilities themselves. And really, it was all levels within utilities that were presented there. And that it wasn't just a, you know, a consultant-driven, you know, kind of effort where all the expertise lied there. It was really the pure utilities. And this model was, they appreciated it.
Yeah, I think it really reinforces our approach, which is to keep our focus on the utilities and making this a very actionable, a very meaningful thing for the people who are using it every day. So that it's nice to it's always nice to have that affirmation.
You know, and I'll just throw in that this was not as much on the people and organizational culture side, but people, I think, appreciated the business process modeling and the fact that you could as Dan Ott took us through, and here's somebody responsible for project management, you know, for the whole CIP, you know, in his utility, and here he's going through a business process model as a way of communicating to the organization. I mean, it didn't surprise me because I've seen it in all the calls, but but I think that was a little bit of an eye opener. And that was very effective. So, so I guess if back to you, Lisa.
Well, there, you can advance the slide. Any other comments that you'd like to share with the group before we push on?
I just want to second what Mark and Scott said. The fact that the utilities were there made it very different from other workshops. It was not a bunch of consultants just talking, or vendors or something like that. That was the key point. And we had one person from the vendor community who said to me, not public, but in private, he says, I run into these things all the time, but I'm just a technology guy. I can't fix these things. And so it was very, very good. And hopefully we'll have better conditions at the utility management conference.
And speaking of that, and Mark, you might want to comment briefly on it too, because the steering committee has had some discussions about it. But, what we want to do is more outreach and expose more utilities to it. So that would be one of the primary objectives of at the utility management conference. At least it seems like that's the direction we're headed, right, Mark?
Yes, we definitely, outreach is going to be an important part of our strategic plan. And it's not, and just for Cello's point, it's not that we don't love our friends and colleagues who are manufacturers or consultants, because we do. It's just, this is just a little different approach.
Okay, Lisa.
I think we can push on to our next slide.
Yeah, and I think Alice, some of you have seen this material, but not everybody has. It's been provided to you. This isn't her full presentation, but since we're focusing on what we're doing currently and what we're doing this year, we're going to turn it over to Alice, who can repeat some of this for you.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And I'm known for being brief, so hopefully this won't take too long. So yeah, I think we've talked in this group before about wanting to make sure that we finalize the assessment tool and put together some sort of framework so that people know how to use the assessment tool before we start piloting it, because even our pilot utilities wanted some sort of background and way to get buy-in from their leadership. And so I'm just going to walk really quickly through what we hope to accomplish the rest of this year in this team. And if you can go to the next slide, please. So let's see. This wasn't one of my slides. I should have looked at this after you emailed me this weekend, Scott.
You should have looked at it, but just to remind people, Alice, that we had these 7 categories and survey questions, in our assessment tool related to them, and what we're kind of focusing on, currently.
Yeah, and I think this goes into what Lisa has said at the beginning, is that we originally had 2 different teams in workforce and organizational culture, and we realized they were so linked together that as we started to put the assessment tool together, we realized we had a lot of overlapping categories in each, and so we ended up combining it into one assessment tool. And so now we want to take the answers that people give from those various categories and find a way to analyze them in a way and present them in a way that will be very useful and help with the change management. And so I think that's basically what this is saying, and that's the first 3 months here of our effort. Next slide, please. So in the overview, we just said what we were planning to do over time. So orienting to this slide, if you look at the sort of right half of the slide, each of the blue boxes are things that we're doing here together in these meetings as a group, where we're really looking to get a lot of input and from everybody who's involved in this. The yellow ones are more things that individual utilities will do, such as piloting the survey and things like that. The red are the various events. We just talked about WEFTEC. We sort of did a preview of the Utility Management Conference. And so as you look at it, we're now in that first box, almost in the middle of the slide here, where we're talking about finalizing the tool, finding ways to analyze and present them, and of course, draft guidelines that I just mentioned a minute ago. Next, we'll be moving on to actually getting utilities to pilot it. Oop, not the next slide. There you go.
Sorry.
That's okay. I know you're sleepy. Next, moving on for the next 3 months, then to have utilities pilot it, and that's why it's yellow, because the individual utilities will be doing this. But overlapping with that, at the same time, really looking at revising as we go, as questions come in and people say, hey, people are a little confused by this, we can make those adjustments as we go, as well as putting together the analysis method and some of the presentations, with the idea that at the end we'll have some case studies that will be useful for utilities moving forward. Okay, now next slide, Jello. And so this is something that actually this group, I think it was in a meeting about a month or so ago, had done a Mentimeter to say, you know, what was really important. And the number one thing was to develop those guidelines for the assessment process. And so the core team has really been talking about how to get that done, how to make sure that the guidelines fit what the need is right now, so that the pilot utilities will have enough information to be able to do a really good pilot. Of course, finalizing the assessment method, and I think that's really close. There's just a few details that need to be added. And then also to think about how this is going to intersect with the other WISE efforts with technology, process, and change management, so that it can be as useful as possible. And then, of course, conduct the pilots themselves. So those were the priorities that this team came up with, and is what we're focusing on through the next several months. Next slide. And so, yeah, I mean, this is basically what we're asking our partner utilities to do. The core team is working on the methodology and financing and assessment. And then we're asking everybody here if they would be willing to test pilot this tool by selecting a specific business process. It's not something that we're looking for you to give to your entire utility and say, you know, what's our overall organizational culture in sort of a master or theoretical way, but rather what is happening with this team in terms of workforce and organizational culture in relation to a specific business process or change that you want to make. So then we would ask you to apply the tool to that process, and then give the results back and your experiences back, so that we know how well it's working and can really start in a very real way thinking about how to plug that into change management and other focus areas. Next slide. So that's it. Right now we're revising, or I guess after that, we'll completely finalize the tool based on lessons learned from the pilots, refine the guidelines as needed, and integrate with change management, as I mentioned earlier. And I think this is my last slide, but go ahead, Jill.
No, there's more.
Oh,
there's more, Alice.
Oh, okay. So yeah. Oh, okay. So this is what we're doing with the guidelines right now. This is what people had asked for, is that we know in the assessment tool there's some terminology. For example, in my utility, we call our largest groupings work groups, and then we have divisions under that, and then we have work teams. But we know other utilities are different. And so when we were putting the tool together, we used things like your work team. But the guidelines will point out where those things are and where you might need to tailor it for your own utility, because we know people just use different terms for different things. So that we'll talk about how to adjust it, how to apply the tool, how to analyze the results, and then how to use the results to support change management. Next slide.
This is the last one.
Okay. So then it's really about forming those case studies from the pilot utilities. You know, really critically examining what the tool told you, how you might need to change your approach. You might need to slow down and do some backup steps. You might be ready to go, but this will help to tell you where to focus. And then just get some lessons learned from the people who piloted it. How well did it work? Where did you have problems? Did you have people telling you they were confused by the tool? You know, things like that, so that we can then refine it and come up with a product that was going to be useful for everybody. So that was it.
Yeah, and maybe this has been part of the conversation in some of the, even, you know, in the past meetings that we've had, is there is this interest in even organization-wide use of a tool, but we felt that it was really, and the team felt it was real important to focus on processes or functions or something that is very tangible and that can deal with a work process. And it happens. And Cello and I have been sitting in all these other meetings on, with all the other teams, is that they're thinking also that the workforce and organizational culture and change management and technology really apply to all the other business processes that they're working with. So it really aids and supports the integration of workforce and organizational culture with methodologically with all the other work that's going on. We should, before we get to the core team talking about what they've been working on, and which is just another level of detail below what Alice has provided, maybe turn it back to you, Lisa, so that we can kind of take a pause and see what everybody else, what some feedback on the work plan is at this stage. And Pat Boyle had a comment that she didn't mind the repeated information, even though she's been quite engaged in all of this. Actually, she's attended some of the core team meetings, and because it's a learning process, and repeating isn't a big problem.
Okay, I think we have another slide we can advance to.
Well, you might want to show the next slide, which is really the next agenda item about the work of the core team to date, and having some discussion around that. We could go ahead with this if you want, but it just, if there's any comments at this stage by people that where they want to comment on the work plan, and does that sound right?
Yeah, let's pop back. There's some questions on the previous slide, use for case studies. What did the tool tell you? How did you change your approach to the process technology change? How well did that work? Refine the guidelines based on case studies. So we're looking for your feedback specifically. So I think we're still on the wrong slide. Can we back up one more slide?
There we go.
Yeah. So just giving you pausing here to give you a chance to give us your feedback on the use for case studies questions that are here. We'd be interested in hearing your thoughts if you've got some information or a reaction at this stage. That'll help us move forward in a good way.
So we're not reluctant to actually call on people either. You kind of know that routine, but just want to know, like, the work plan and the way what Alice laid out, which is a reflection of what, the team is the core team has actually confirmed that it made sense. Is that still making sense to you? Pat, Parjat, Rebecca, Mark, others.
We need practitioner feedback and input reactions that make it better. So, and at this stage, it may not be deep, but you might have some reaction that's good to share, and that will inspire others to potentially speak up as well.
Hi, this is Pat. The how well did that work question? How well did that not work, or are we not going to go negative? So kind of want to get both sides of the coin.
This is Cello. I think that's very important. Actually, I think what did not go well is more valuable information than what did go well. And I think that when the statement was how well, that it was on a range from not well at all to really well. And I would fully agree with you. Yeah.
Kind of like our survey or our assessment tool, where if it didn't go well, why not? And we had a list of tier 2 questions well, there could be tier 2 questions, type of concept in this as well if it didn't go well, so that we can make course corrections. And I think that in the change team meeting also, they were talking about how do you basically, and in the core team, how do you basically in one area of the utility, if you're doing this survey, and then you take it in another area of the of the utility for a survey. I think Great Lakes, and Kesra isn't on the line here, but they were looking at the CIP preparation process, and they were looking at their asset management team, I think, as 2 different areas. Well, did they learn different things, and what did they learn from each other? So that might relate to some changes that we could make either in the process, methodology, or assessment tool itself. So, or the guidelines in terms of how it's used.
Okay.
So maybe we just want to, in order to bring out some more discussion, we maybe go to the next slide where the core team, and we have some core team people on the phone here, on the line, who could speak to this. But these were some of the topic areas that have been where there's been some pretty deep, conversations. And I don't know if
actually the recommendation is opposite way. Sorry.
There's-
Don't allow everybody to touch the candidate.
Scott, and Lisa, I'll have to step away.
put
for
yourself
ju-
on mute. Yeah.
I'll just, yeah, sorry, I'll put myself on mute.
Okay. So I don't know, Alice, there, Mark, Pat, others who are on the line who've been part of the core team discussions, and there have been some good ones. Whether maybe you want to just start out, Alice, with some of these items and some of the substance that the core team has discussed. I mean, I'd rather have the core team do this rather than have me do it. So.
Yeah, I'll start. I won't go in the order of the bullets because I think some of our best conversations have been around the guidance documents and the demographics. Really thinking about what kind of guidance pilot utilities are going to find really useful. What about the assessment tool do we need to sort of explain a little bit more? And I highlighted a little bit of that in terms of the terminology, but also having a discussion about if you include demographic questions, what would you get from them, and at what point are you making it so that people are less likely to answer because they don't feel anonymous? And so having like a discussion about things like that in the guidance document is a lot of, I think, the useful conversation that we've had in the core team, is to really sort of think those things through so that when a utility takes this up and tries to use it, they're not going into it blind, and they're really thinking about oh, okay, should I be asking all of these questions, or which ones are actually important to me and my utility and going to be useful for what I need to do? So that's some of what I've heard in those conversations.
So Alice, you alluded to it, but when you are dealing with one process or one area, confidentiality is important. So you may have less on the demographic side. Was that part of the discussion?
Yeah, that's part of it. If you're talking about a relatively small change in your utility and you only have, say, 8 people taking the survey, you don't want to ask for, age, number of years with utility, race, gender, like all of those things, because chances are any one combination of those is like one person. So if you're giving it to like 50 people, you can ask more demographic questions. But if you're giving it to a small group, really think about what is most important. Are you trying to find out if people who've been there a long time have a different way of thinking about the people who haven't been there a long time? Just ask that one, that type of thing. So that was a lot of the discussion we had.
Yeah. Yeah, Mark, you were involved in most of these conversations, and Pat, and Jessica too. Do you have comments on any of these items?
Yeah, I think, just to reiterate the point, I think it's important to get demographic information, but the most important thing, I think, personally, about these, anytime you're trying to get this information, is for people to feel that they can be open and honest. So I would always err on the side of open and honest feedback, as opposed to wanting to slice and dice the data from multiple perspectives. And you may just decide what area you want to get the information on. Perhaps it's longevity, because that's usually one where you can. It's funny because when we've done this at Clean Water Services, thinking broke down a lot along longevity with the company, and so it was very useful to take a look at that information. And that can still keep things fairly anonymous if you're just using one of those data points, right? Like how long have you worked for our utility? So, but again, to me, it's one of those things I think we need to emphasize to anyone wanting to use this tool. It's only good if you get accurate information, right? If it's garbage in, garbage out. So it's really important to create it in such a way that people feel that they can be completely open and honest with their feedback. And obviously that will come with a few people, depending, with some real nasty comments and some other things, but that's okay. I mean, that's still feedback. Because then to me, what that says, if people are willing to do that, then obviously people feel pretty comfortable in responding. So you can process that data and figure out what you need to do with it. So I would rather have that than people just saying, oh no, everything's great when it isn't.
Yeah. Pat, did you have any comments?
I just wanted to note that people are very suspicious of supervisors are captured in the same group. So sometimes you have to remember to separate the supervisory from the non-supervisory, even management from supervisory. And I think you'll get the more honest responses. We had a survey a couple months ago, and I think it was total silence. It was a Teams meeting, and there were some supervisors in it, and the non-supervisory people were really reserved. And I don't remember, it was not organized in my office by someone outside my office. And I feel like they just said, oh, okay, we'll do Pat's group today. And then they started with these questions and people just clammed up. So it wasn't useful at all.
Well, you learned at least one thing though, right, Pat?
What's that?
People don't feel comfortable speaking around their supervisor.
That's right.
which is actually it's an important point of information, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Mark, if we look at the questions themselves or the assessment questions themselves, some of them are, about the communication with the supervisor and management, and if they can see who it is that's complaining about them, then it's not going to work. So that's that's important. Parajat, you've always been you've made some of these calls, but not all of them. But is this on track? And what comments do you have about guidance documents and demographics?
Yes. So about demographics, I agree with what Lisa was saying, that it is more about specific questions within the group. We don't have to ask all the questions, whatever we are trying to get to, that we would go to that only specific questions in the demographic. And then about confidentiality and anonymity as an industry, what I have noticed that people are now more going to being confidential than being anonymous, and that is kind of helpful if it is not anonymous in a broader sense to see who is saying what. But I understand that at times people are not comfortable, and it takes time to develop that credibility. I mean, when we started here at KC Water, our participation rate was not that good, but over the course of years, it has improved. Yes, we still have people who do not trust that survey will be used in the right way. And every so often we have an issue that come up. but it is improving. But it takes time. That yes, we asked all these questions in our survey. These demographic questions have always been there, and initially it was a big issue, but like I said, over the course of time, people are more accepting of it.
So do you think, Parjat, that had to do with the trust of the team that you're working with and basically the respect that people are showing from each other that may not have been there, when it first started?
Yes, and it was also about how it was organized and how the results were communicated. So far, I mean, earlier results were not communicated, and then we started having individual meeting with each subgroup, so to say, and specific results if we were able to get there and share that, and involving third party in administering the survey and them collecting the survey, and not us collecting the survey and them going through the survey. But at the same time, they were informed that only one person in the organization, and that's me, will have access to all the survey results and nobody else.
Yeah. Great Lakes had Patricia as well as Kesra participating in all these calls, and they were very vocal about things. And one thing that they brought up was the second bullet there, the need. But unfortunately they had a conflict and couldn't attend today's meeting. But the need for basic analytics and tool and scorecard, what they were pushing for was, develop some basic analytics that will tell you, kind of I don't know if it's a gap analysis or strengths or weaknesses. That we haven't done this yet. I think that's one of the next steps, is to develop a basic analytical tool where the information can be evaluated. And that was seen as something that was important to do in the fairly near term, because if we're having these pilots where they're going to be piloting different processes in different organizations, what's a basic analytical tool that can be used to share the results of the survey? So I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that. I mean, Alice, you could comment on that one too, or Pat, or Rebecca hasn't spoken up yet, but you might give your impressions too, Rebecca, although you may not be doing a pilot, but you've been involved in all these conversations. Yeah, she's on mute and maybe she doesn't have anything to add, but anyone want to talk about the basic analytical tool and scorecard? That seemed to be something that people felt that they needed before we started doing the pilot assessments. Does that make sense to people, that we would have something basic that we could use to evaluate the information? Yes?
I think what you said about, identifying the strengths and the weaknesses, that's going to be important to this. I also think that's one of the things that's going to be refined once you have a chunk of data to work with. What do you want to get out of it? So I really don't know I'm interested in the topic, but I don't know what type of analytics to apply because that's not my area of expertise.
Yeah, Cello had to leave the meeting, but this has come up with the assessments for the other teams as well. And so Cello is going to be, what they've kind of asked him to do is do a straw man type of thing, kind of a straw man type of tool that could be reviewed, by the teams.
Yes,
Oh.
I'm able to jump in just for a minute because I was out of town, so I didn't realize they put this thing on my calendar. So I have some ideas, and what I may do is ping a few individuals and then get prepared for the core team meeting next week, a week from now, with something specific. So it's been spinning in my head over the weekend. So I have some some ideas that I can show next week.
Yeah, that's great.
I'm just reacting a little bit to the whole discussion, not just what we were discussing. Thinking about, if it's a thin level of trust, employees are going to be triggered to self-protect, and therefore they won't engage. They're going to withdraw. But that suggests that there's something to understand about the levels above them. And we're focused on getting feedback from the organization at large, which I think is one element that we need to. But is there a way in which we could create a tool that would be focused on those upper levels, so that the manager at the top and their direct reports have a way to assess, because it all starts there. And I feel like that might be, we're dipping down to get it, how it plays out at that next level, but it starts at that upper level. Is there a feedback tool that we could develop that would help have a better grasp of whether those senior leaders are resisting and they're just complying because they're going to not then bring that to their work if their heart's really not in it?
Yeah. I think both you and Mark have brought that up. We could definitely, from an analytical standpoint, deal with that, perhaps, but it's also a subgroup that, where we should probably figure out a way to deal with that particular problem and issue. Mark, did you have any additional thoughts?
No, I'd be happy to work on something now where we could put something together.
Yeah, that's a good comment. It's almost like if you do the survey and it points out that as that level of the organization is a problem, then it becomes, what do you do about it? So the one question is, when in the sequence do we deal with it? Do we deal with it as a part of a change process? In terms of management, or is it built into the process and the assessment that we're talking about here? But that's a good question. Yeah, I neglected to just point out, and maybe this is obvious, but the bad news was that at the conference, the workshop, Lisa and Alice and Kesra weren't there in person to present it. The good news was that they weren't there to present it because we were able to record it, and which we couldn't do for the whole rest of the session. And so we basically have it available. WEF is interested in putting it up on their, even external site. And we're going to make use of it. Lisa did a great job of providing an overall context and what the challenge is and the problems that we're trying to solve. And Kesra talked about the work of the assessment. And then Alice said, what are we working on now? And that was a great combination of information that's recorded and was efficient and very well received. So just that aside, and thanks to those people for doing that. So Lisa, we have 10 minutes left, and a little less than 10 minutes, and maybe take it back to you. Maybe you have you always come up with some additional thoughts, and context. Maybe you have some other things to share before we talk about next steps.
Well, I've been giving this a lot of thought, because I think this idea of who do we choose to be as leaders is fundamentally important to helping our organizations change. And there's three sides of change. One is the technical piece, one is the behavioral, and one's the cultural. And I think if we don't have trust at the top level, it's not going to evolve in our organization by a few at the next level having that piece. So really feel that at this point in my career, I really realize how significant being able to bring about change in an organization rests with a few that are seen as the top leaders, and how consistent, basically how intrinsically motivated are they to be that kind of a leader, or are they just trying to comply and earn favor from you as their boss? But when you're not there to observe, it's a whole different matter. And I think that's a big challenge, because we know that technology is changing fast, but everything seems to suggest that the social trends are changing even faster. So we need to catch the wind and be a part of that to make our organizations be where they need to be. I'm really glad to have gotten involved with this effort. I hope that others are seeing that it's unfolding to be something that's going to provide a huge amount of value. I think as we, as a group of practitioners, try this and can compare it to our organizational situations to see how it is or isn't going to help us advance our organizations. So I appreciate everybody being a part of this, and especially the core team with the extra work that they're putting in to support this effort. We have a question before us in terms of next steps. So I'm going to turn the floor back over to you. Also want to suggest that we need to revisit our meeting schedule. We were meeting every 2 weeks. Perhaps that's too frequent. I don't know if going to every 3 weeks would be better, but you know, the core team can probably give us a little bit of feedback on that as well. So one question, how frequently do we think we need to meet as a group? And any other thoughts you have about how to make this process be as successful as it can be?
I think Cello was trying to talk, but he's probably multitasking, which he doesn't like.
Yeah, I am. It's not that I don't like it. I'm horrible at it. The difficulty of having it on a 3-week schedule is because we have the other initiatives on biweekly. So it would be, like last week we had 4 meetings, and so it'd be a little bit more difficult logistically to have it at 3 weeks. So 2 or 4 would be a lot easier to implement, because we would just drop one meeting, So that's an easy variance explanation. Just a thought.
So do we want to wait and have it turn this for now into a monthly meeting so the core team can meet twice to to prepare, do more work? This is a challenging area. Or do we want to do it after their next core team meeting? What does the core team think about that?
So it's monthly or every 2 weeks still, because every 3rd week doesn't work, right? That's our 2 choices.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is Alice. I feel like monthly seems like so long if something happens, but I'm okay with things being canceled if there's nothing to say. So if we keep them every 2 weeks on the calendar, but we're coming up on a one and there's kind of not much to say or ask, then we cancel.
Just a thought, Lisa, how about that if we keep them on the current schedule, but we say, okay, this time it's core team meeting. And whoever wants can join, but it's not. It will be a working session, not a kind of update and reporting session. So that way we keep the time slots and we keep the flexibility, and we can just say, send maybe a note ahead of time. The next meeting will be a core team meeting. Does that make sense?
It does, because then when we have our schedules set up, it is hard sometimes to, as Alice pointed out, if we don't have it on our calendars and we need it, it might take us a while to get it back on the calendar. So sticking with the schedule and then being flexible, that this group may not need to meet every 2 weeks, but we'll give you a heads up as to what kind of meeting it's going to be, whether it's a core team or the regular group.
Okay, thank you.
And if there is something that is developed by the core team, I mean, whether we use Mural or some other, kind of tool with the larger team, to get feedback on work they've done, it's a question of how fast are they going to have something to be reviewed. So that makes sense to leave it on the calendar, and it's available for core team use. We should probably communicate, Lisa, what the plan is. Because there are quite a few people that aren't on the call who would care about it.
We'll have to we'll get an email out to the whole
Yeah.
group so they're aware.
Frederick, I see that you're on the phone and we haven't heard from you. Do you have any comments? He may be just monitoring it.
Fred is on mute. Well, we can catch up with him later.
We'll catch up. Not a problem. I think one significant thing that came up in this meeting in terms of feedback is what Lisa introduced about how do you deal with the leadership team and the challenge of the leadership team in this context of workforce and organizational culture. And so that's an area for us to figure out how best to deal with that. But that was a new topic for this team. So we'll need to follow up on that. But Lisa, we just got 2 minutes, so I don't know if you want to give back the time or if you have something further.
I think we can wrap it up. Maybe people can use the chat and put in 5, meaning that you felt like you had a good opportunity to participate in the meeting, and 1 feeling like it wasn't very inviting for you to participate, just to help us continue to kind of fine tune our meeting process. We're still figuring out how to do this virtual meeting as best as we can. So 5, you felt like you had good opportunity to participate. 1, we need to do much better. And that will help us with our planning for the future. So just throw it in the chat, 5 or 1, or you can use 3, I guess, too, if you think it's kind of getting there.
I just wanted to add one more thing. When Lisa, you said the thin level of trust, it's just echoing in my head. And the biggest example of that is the COVID vaccine process, because that's the people that are most resistant are the people that have a very thin level of trust of government and municipalities in general. And it's just opened my eyes a whole different way to how do you change the core feeling of a person who has that distrust of authority, for lack of a better term. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, it's hard. You can't educate if there isn't trust, because they're not going to listen to what you're saying, and that seems to be the solution we all tend towards. But you have to start with that creating safety, which is respect and permission to engage in an organization. So if you haven't had that, you haven't had the experience of a high level of trust. So I think our challenges are before us. I think it'll be a good journey for us to go on together. With that.
So Lisa, I see that people were saying that they had an opportunity to participate. We talked more about, hey, here are the issues that the core team is dealing with, really, rather than, hey, we were dealing with it, we produced this. Now, what are your thoughts in terms of the bigger team review? So maybe if we have that next time, the nature of the participation would be a little different, even though people are saying that they felt it was open for participation.
We'll work on that for our next agenda to have maybe a conversation starter for discussion on a topic like the one we're just discussing, because we can't get our top leadership team to sponsor and to behave in a way that reflects the need for more engagement in our organization, then instead of helping us, they're going to block us.
Yeah. And in the workshop, by the way, there was unanimity about the fact that you needed support of top management for this to be successful. You can't just go off and do all this without an awareness and an understanding and a commitment to it. So that's definitely an issue.
All right, everyone. I think we burned up our time together, but we did some good work, so appreciate it. And 2 weeks from today, well, this group will be meeting, or the core team will be meeting, and we'll be sure and give you a heads up on which. Thanks, everyone.